Of course, the oldest poems that we know are the work of Homer and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Of course, both of those come to us because they were written down, but the most historians believe that long before they were written down, they were memorized by poets and spoken in a kind of in a kind of ritual. So, as well as being a ritual is something that satisfies people, but it can also be a way of passing knowledge on. So each day I come to this chair in this room in the morning, and I write, and this is how I've spent my life, and intellectually it's very rewarding. It's still a challenge to write a novel, and it's a special challenge to write a popular novel that people will love. R.K. Narayan, I like his novels very much. I've read quite a lot of them. They're very gently humorous, aren't they? You will remember that. They're not, laugh a minute. They're just quite wry. I wouldn't want to write about the British in India. To be honest, I don't find them a very attractive group of people. They were very cruel and exploitative and completely racist. Most of the time, the history of the human race is a history of tyranny. People were ruled by kings and lords and chieftains and so on. Most countries have never known democracy, and those of us who got it, the lucky ones, we need to take care of it. We need to be very vigilant against people who want to take away our freedom.
I'm told that I have 30 minutes, so I have a lot of questions. I'll start right into the interview. Congratulations on your new book. I'm just about finishing it. And let's start with the launch of the book at the magnificent Salisbury Cathedral, which was a huge inspiration for you to write The Pillars of the Earth.
Yes,
And if I'm not wrong, Stonehenge is just around 10, 12 kilometers from there.
yes,
Yeah, and I'm imagining there you are reading aloud from the book in a cathedral, and the book is about a monument that predates the cathedral from uh, several millennia.
yes.
So I'm thinking it must have felt like a strange sort of time travel for you. How was the moment like for you?
Uh, well, it's always a joy to go to Salisbury Cathedral. And of course, Stonehenge is a religious monument, as Salisbury Cathedral is. So they have a lot in common. Of course, they're very different also. The cathedral was built in the Middle Ages, and the monument was built 4,500 years ago. So, therefore, 3,500 years before Salisbury Cathedral. But both are examples of people aspiring to build something that will last forever. Uh, and in both cases, the actual builders were quite humble people, not rich people, not educated people, not kings and princes and so on. In the case of the cathedral, they were masons, they were workmen. And in the case of Stonehenge, I think they were basically ordinary people who banded together because, of course, it took many people to build Stonehenge. They had to bring those giant stones 30 kilometers from the wood where the stones were found to the site of the monument. And that was very difficult. It took at least 200 people to move one of those stones. So it was a communal effort.
There is one lovely passage in Circle of Days where Joya watches priests performing this complex dance, holding potteries and all, and she realizes that there is a deeper meaning to it. I want to quote from the book here. She could make out some of the words of the song, which mentioned winter and summer, spring and autumn, and other seasonal events. The appearance of new grass, the migration of deer, the falling of leaves. Somehow, Joya guessed, this dance was the way they always knew which day of the year it was. It's beautiful how the lines reveal the link between ritual and knowledge, and between faith, observation, and what we now call science. So you've spoken about your how you're an atheist, but I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on the relevance of rituals or even religion in our modern scientific world?
Well, I think the rituals at Stonehenge had two purposes. They were religious, but also they were a means of handing knowledge on to the next generation because there was no writing, of course. In the Stone Age, there was no paper pens in this part of the world, in Western Europe. Writing had not been invented. It was in the process of being invented in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. But in this part of the world, there was no writing. So how did they pass knowledge from one generation to the next? It must have been in poems and songs. And the, of course, the oldest poems that we know are the work of Homer and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Of course, both of those come to us because they were written down, but the most historians believe that long before they were written down, they were memorized by poets and spoken in a kind of in a kind of ritual. So, as well as being a ritual is something that satisfies people, but it can also be a way of passing knowledge on. Well, people do still have rituals, don't they? Um, uh, we, for example, we always sing the same song at a birthday. We sing "Happy Birthday to You,"
Yeah,
and and that's a ritual. All the family gather. There's always a cake,
yeah,
and we always sing that song, and it marks the passage of time for a member of the family. Um, uh, and it's hard to say whether rituals are important or not, but they have survived, haven't they? We
yes,
have, you don't have to go to church to get married. You can get married at the town hall in this country and in most countries in Western Europe, certainly. Marriage is a legal thing, a civil thing, but most people do still have a ritual in a church where they make vows to one another and they sing, and the priest blesses their marriage. So I think the old rituals have survived very well into the technological 21st century.
yes. Uh, your spouse, Barbara Follett, was Minister for Culture and Tourism in the Gordon Brown government, and I think I read it somewhere that she played a crucial role in transforming Stonehenge from just a historical landmark to a living cultural site. I wonder whether she actually contributed to the project, how she shaped your new book, and how her work influenced it.
The If you go to the monument today, you arrive at a big car park, very big car park, hundreds of cars, and a building which is a visitor center where you buy your ticket, and there's a bookshop and a restaurant and an exhibition hall. But all of these things are a couple of miles away from Stonehenge because the idea was that Stonehenge should be seen in its original landscape as it would have been seen in the Stone Age, with no buildings, no cars, so on. So when you go to Stonehenge, you go to the car park, You buy your ticket in the visitor center, then you get on a bus, and the bus drives you to the monument. When you get to the monument, you can't see the visitor center and you can't see the car park. It looks pretty much as it would have looked in the Stone Age, and that was her concept. That was Barbara's concept.
And when you started writing this book, did it involve contributions from her work?
Well, she's always interested in what I'm writing, but I'm the one who writes it.
Circle of Days is about prehistory, and as a reader, I would like to know about your prehistory. I know that your first successful book was Eye of the Needle, the book that made you globally famous. But that was your 12th book, remarkably. And what was that period like to you, writing book after book until you achieved that kind of success with Eye of the Needle? And what lessons did you learn from that period before that success?
Um, well, uh, each book I wrote, each time I wrote a book, I wanted it to be a bestseller. So there were 10 disappointments. But all that time I was learning. Um, uh, I- I learned three things. One was to plan the book. Before writing chapter one, I make a plan of the whole book, which says what happens in each chapter and who the characters are. And I spend a long time doing that. I spend at least 6 months writing the plan. And the first time I did that was for Eye of the Needle, and it worked. And so I've done it for every book ever since. I also researched Eye of the Needle, and I found that that helped me to give the novel a grain of reality. Um, just being able to say, uh, for example, in Eye of the Needle, uh, things like you could buy cigarettes by weight instead of by number. So you could buy 4 ounces of cigarettes. It was very difficult. People had ration books. You could only have a small amount of meat and bread and sugar and so on. And all of those things were part of everyday life. And writing about them gave a sense of reality to the novel. And finally, my early books were all too short, and I wrote them too fast. I made a decision that Eye of the Needle would be 100,000 words, and that I would take as much time as I wanted. In the end, I still wrote it quite quickly, but it wasn't such a hasty novel as my previous ones. And I think I learned those three things, and I think that's what made it a bestseller.
Yes. Today, you are a brand name author, a towering figure in your field, someone who can hold a Ken Follett summit in the Frankfurt Book Fair, where publishers would, queue behind you, and the who's who of the publishing world would be there. So, what has this remarkable success taught you, both as a writer and as you're written, the grandson of a coal miner?
Um, well, what has it taught me?
How do you handle success? You have been writing for so long.
Well, it's I wrote Eye of the Needle when I was 27, and I'm 76 now, so that's almost 50 years ago. That's more than 50 years ago. Uh, anyway, no, it's almost 50 years. Anyway, so really, I've been living like this for a very long time. And so each day I come to this chair in this room in the morning and I write, and this is how I've spent my life. And I intellectually it's very rewarding. It's still a challenge to write a novel. And it's a special challenge to write a popular novel that people will love. Uh, and so uh, it hasn't become easy. It's still a challenge. Uh, and really, writing the next bestseller is the main thing on my mind as far as work is concerned. And of course, success has great rewards, and I live in a very pleasant house, uh, and uh, and I drink very good wine and champagne. There's a lot. It's very pleasant. Um, I still know that the most important things in my life are the people in my life, my family and my friends, and they and that's what really makes a man happy. Uh, so I guess that's a pretty important thing to know. So an important thing to learn at some point in your life.
Yes, you're known for your meticulous research. So, is the rituals involved in how you go through that research process while writing your novels?
Rituals, no. Uh, what happens is I have an idea for a book, uh, and I research the historical period that it's set in, mainly by reading books, but I also travel. I also go and look at places. Um, I look at maps and photographs, and I use Google Earth sometimes because places you can't go, you can visit on Google Earth, which has been very helpful to me at times. Um, and the I write an outline of the story and research the background at the same time, and the two things help one another. The writing the outline tells me what I need to study, and studying gives me new ideas for events that can take place in the book, new dramas for the book. So that's generally the first 6 months. I write a first draft, and then I show it to people. I show it to historians who can correct any errors I've made. I show it to my editors who sometimes make good suggestions for improving the story. I show it to friends and family who also make useful comments. And then I write it again. I don't edit the first draft. I write a new draft, completely new draft, second draft. And that process takes me between 2 and 3 years.
3 years for one book.
2 to 3 years, yeah.
2 to 3 years. Yes. There is a story about you and the Notre Dame fire that broke out in 2019. That when the fire broke out, many people, including journalists who were reporting from the site, they were asking themselves, how can a building of stone, made of stone, catch fire? And you were the first to offer an explanation because of the research you have done for the Pillars of the Earth.
Yes, that's right. Um, in the Pillars of the Earth, the old cathedral burns down. That's why they have to build a new cathedral. And so I had researched how a cathedral could catch on fire. I knew from the history books that several cathedrals had burned down. And so I thought at the time, well, how does that happen? And I discovered that it happens that the fire starts always in the loft, in the roof, which is wood, and so that's the only part of the cathedral really that will burn. Uh, and So when Notre Dame burned, and the journalists didn't seem to understand how it could be burning, I tweeted that the fire must be in the roof space because that's where there was a lot of timber, and it would be very dry timber because it was hundreds of years old, and it would once it was alight, it would burn very fiercely. And after that, I started to get calls from the newsrooms, and I spent the most of that evening and all of the following day doing interviews for radio and television, and answering that question, explaining how the fire might have started and how it would have continued, and the damage that it had by that time. It had done a lot of damage, although happily the damage was limited. Um, and so that on the third day, I went to Paris to be on a television program about Notre Dame. And On the day after that, I had breakfast with my French editor, and she asked me to write a short book about Notre Dame, 10,000 words, which I did. and I gave the royalties from the book to a cathedral in Brittany. I was very pleased and privileged to be invited to the reopening of the cathedral after the repairs had been finished. It took a little more than 5 years to do all those repairs. It was really very quick, actually, and it was reopened um, last year. And I was there for the reopening, and it was a great joy. The cathedral is looking better than it's ever looked because they've cleaned the stone, and which we thought the stone was white. Well, sorry, we thought the stone was grey because it always was grey. It has been grey for hundreds of years, but in fact it's white. And when they cleaned it, it looked beautiful.
Yeah, your fascination with cathedrals, architecture, that's very evident in your works. Uh, you've spoken about how you grew up in a puritanical Christian group called the Plymouth Brothers, and they didn't have traditional churches. They had bare halls with uh, bare walls and all.
That's
So,
right.
is that austere background that contributed to your later fascination with
I
cathedrals and
think
bishop?
so. I think it is because for us, when I was a boy, a church was just a room. We didn't call it a church. We called it the Gospel Hall, and there were no pictures and no statues, and it was nothing fancy. It was all very plain. There was no altar, just a table in the middle of the room, and no priest with robes and so on, nothing like that. And so when I looked at cathedrals as a young man, I was really very struck. This was something completely different from the way I had been brought up, and it was very intriguing. It was very beautiful, highly decorated, very expensive, big, imposing, and that was the beginning of my fascination with cathedrals.
Yeah. The last time you were in India, I think in 2010, to promote Fall of Giants, which is the start of the century trilogy, which covers 100 years of mainly European history. Between that trilogy and the Kingsbridge series, and now Circle of Days, you have incredibly covered, I think, most of a millennia probably in history. And as a reader from India, I have to ask, uh, can we ever hope for a Ken Follett novel set in India, probably during the British Raj?
Well, of course, there have been British people have written a lot of novels about India, but they always write about the British in India. They don't really write about the Indians in India. Um, I do uh, I do like the novels of Narayan. Are you familiar with that writer? He's an Indian writer.
Arcane.
R.K. Narayan. Yes,
Yes.
that's right. Yes. I like his novels very much. I've read quite a lot of them, and they're very gently humorous, aren't they? You will remember that.
Yes.
They're not, laugh a minute. They're just quite wry. Um, Now, what kind of novel would I write if I were to write a novel about India? Well, I wouldn't want to write about the British in India, um, because, to be honest, I don't find them a very attractive group of people. Um, they were very cruel and exploitative and completely racist. And I can't imagine putting together a story about those rather unpleasant people. And I don't know enough. I mean, of course, I'm sure there are many great novels to be written about the history of India, but I'm so unfamiliar with all things Indian that I'm not sure I could do it. It's not a bad idea. I mean, apart from anything else, in in Western Europe, I mean, in Western civilization, Europe and North America, um, people don't know anything about the history of India, except for when the when the British went there. The rest of the history of India is not known generally to people. So it would be a good idea to write about that history. But I feel I would get so many things wrong. I would people people would Indians would say to me, well, you see, that couldn't have happened, and you got that wrong, and you got something else wrong. So I would be very nervous about it. I mean, I would do it if I thought of a really good idea. And there's a lot of drama in Indian history, a lot of wars and battles, and a lot of political stuff. Um, I would be, listen, it's possible, but I would be nervous about it.
There is William Dalrymple here, who has a very wide readership in our country, and his son has also started writing. So a Ken Follett novel would be very welcome, I suppose.
Well, I'll think about it.
So, other than you mentioned R.K. Narayan, besides him, who are your favorite Indian authors?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know very many. I mean, there are a lot of British authors who uh, whose heritage comes from the subcontinent. And of course, Salman Rushdie is a wonderful writer.
While reading Circle of Days, I came across an interesting article about Andrew Carnegie. Uh, he visited Benares in 1878 while he was building his steel empire in the US. And Carnegie went to the Ghats, the steps leading to the Ganga in the city, and was mesmerized by the sight of the city, the temples and the ritualistic scenes and all. He
Yeah.
said these scenes, scenes were the finest sights I have yet witnessed, adding that only a painting like Turner could capture its beauty. So after reading that, I came back to Circle of Days. I resumed the book, but it struck me how closely Banaras and Stonehenge are like aligned in spirit. They are both living sites of the dead. But then I also discovered something surprising. Stonehenge is part of the UNESCO World Heritage List,
Yeah.
but Benares, even though it is the world's oldest continuously living city, it is not. So
Okay.
then I came across this debate about how the UNESCO World Heritage sites were all mostly focused on sites of Western civilization. So, as a writer of historical works, maybe focused much in Europe, where do you see yourself in that debate?
Well, I wouldn't like to take sides. Certainly, UNESCO should consider all important monuments in the world, regardless of uh, of what country they're in or what culture they represent. And if it wouldn't surprise me if Asia is underrepresented on the list, that wouldn't surprise me, um, because the United Nations is, uh, it was set up by Europeans, wasn't it, after the Second World War, particularly by Americans. And I think they should work very hard to be broad-minded and not be biased towards monuments in their own civilization. Um, they could do, you know, there are a lot of, I mean, it's such an important part of the world that we live in that we have these reminders around us of how it used to be and where we come from. And you know, uh, I wrote the Century Trilogy. You read the first book in the Century Trilogy. I wrote that to show how life changed in the 20th century. We many people, millions of people became freer, countries became more democratic, more people got the vote, women got the vote, for example, in many countries uh, in the 20th century. And the monuments remind us of not just of what things used to be like, but how far we've come. The journey that we've all made, um, and it reminds us that the the freedom that we have is fragile. It hasn't always been like this. Most of the time, the history of the human race is a history of tyranny. People were ruled by kings and lords and chieftains and so on. Most people, most countries have never known democracy, and and those of us who got it, the lucky ones, we need to take care of it. We need to be very vigilant against people who want to take away our freedom. Uh, and I think the great thing about these monuments is that they remind us of that. They remind us of how it used to be, make us think of how it is now, and also make us think about what we went through to get this far, to get to freedom and democracy.
Yes. Um, I'll go back to Andrew Carnegie because you have an interesting connection with him. He was from Scotland, you're from Wales, and you grew up reading in the library, I think, uh, existed thanks to his philanthropy. Carnegie
Yes,
gave away most of his fortune to build some 2,500 libraries around the world,
that's right.
including one in your hometown.
That's right, in Cardiff. It's still there and it's still a library. I was there quite recently.
So I want to know how important that library was in shaping you as a reader and eventually as a writer.
Um, well, I loved stories and I loved storybooks. But in the 50s, when I was a boy, my parents weren't particularly poor, but nobody, ordinary people in England were not very well off in the 50s. It was after the war. It was before the prosperity that came with the 60s. So I used to get a book for Christmas and a book for my birthday, and I would read a book in a day in those days. I read very quickly and enjoyed it. Uh, Everybody, all my aunts and uncles knew that they had to give me a book on my birthday, and which is what I wanted. But it was never enough until I joined the library. My parents took me to the public library in a district called Canton in Cardiff, which is, as you know, you've researched this. It's a Carnegie library. Looks like a church. Very interesting architecture. Um, and I was it was like Christmas. I said, can I really borrow any one of these books? And they said you can borrow two. And that was really important to me because suddenly there was no end of books. And I went to that library every week.
And were the restrictions placed by your family on what kind of books you could read?
Strangely enough, no. Um, At first, of course, I just read children's books, which were harmless. But when I was a teenager, I used to go to the library and borrow James Bond books. And strangely, my parents never objected to that. You know, they wouldn't let me go to the movies, they wouldn't buy a television, but they let me borrow anything I liked. And if you think about James Bond, you know, um, everything about James Bond is totally contradictory to what the Plymouth Brethren believe about life. He smokes, he drinks martinis, he goes to bed with women who aren't his wife, does that a lot, and uh, and he enjoys the high life. You know, he's champagne and good food and expensive clothes, and that was all very contrary to what the Plymouth Brethren believed in. But but I don't somehow my parents didn't realize that. And so I read anything I wanted to. I did also read Shakespeare. I used to like the Shakespeare play. I used to read the Shakespeare plays as if they were novels because I liked the stories. And so I didn't. It wasn't all James Bond. I read all the time, and really, that's very important because every writer I know started out as a an avid reader in childhood. And that means if you do that for years, if you read a lot for years and years throughout your youth, by the time you get to your 20s and you start thinking about writing a novel yourself, you already know a lot about novels. You know, you know how they begin, and you understand about writing dialogue or describing a landscape. You understand about cliffhangers, and and you understand about paragraphs and punctuation. So all this is all knowledge that you need to write novels. It's not enough perhaps to write a best-selling novel, but you need all that. And so it was absolutely important for me. And I continued to borrow books from libraries until, I made a lot of money and I could just buy any books I wanted.
Now, at that time in the library, while you were starting to read books, what were the books or authors that had you like, oh, I'm so awed by this, I want to write like this?
There was a writer called Enid Blyton, who wrote adventure stories, usually about children. There would be five children or seven children in a group, and they would get involved in some adventure. She was hugely popular, hugely popular. Um, I also liked, there was a writer called Geoffrey Treece who wrote historical novels. Enid Blyton didn't do historical, but I really liked his books, Geoffrey Treece. I liked stories about spaceships and soldiers, battle, adventure. I really liked adventure, books that had adventure. Um, and and I read all the time, and I still do.
Which is your favorite James Bond book?
I like Live and Let Die. The opening sentence is, "There are moments of great luxury in the life of a secret agent." And that tells you all about James Bond, doesn't it? Because he enjoys luxury, but he's also a secret agent, so he gets into fights and so on. It's a great first line. And it's a really good novel, actually, really good thriller. I've reread it a couple of times since and enjoyed it every time.
So this world of libraries, I go back to Carnegie again. He was there yesterday, and now today we have someone like Jeff Bezos, who is the richest man in one of the richest men in the world, who amassed his fortune by starting a website that sold books. And do you think he can maybe take a leaf out of Carnegie's book, considering that he's often criticized for not doing enough for the publishing business?
Um, well, I would if I was as rich as him. There are uh, in this country, in UK, there are plenty of people who can't read. They, of course, they generally hide it because they're a bit ashamed. But sometimes they come forward and say, "I need to learn to read." We should do a lot more for literacy. It's a terrible handicap for a young person to not be able to read or to not read very well. I mean, most people can read a bit, but people who can't read often develop clever ways of hiding the fact. You know, take it in a restaurant, okay? Imagine you can't read. The waiter hands you a menu. You open the menu, but it means nothing to you. Now, what the kind of thing those people would do is they'd say to the waiter, "Have you got any fish?" This is a restaurant. Of course they have fish. But he says, "Have you got any fish?" And the waiter will say, "Oh, yes, yes, we've got salmon and prawns," and point to them on the menu. So, in a way, the illiterate person cleverly gets the waiter, to read the menu to him.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, I'd really like some salmon." What can I have with that? Could I have potatoes with that? And the waiter would say, well, you can have boiled potatoes or mashed potatoes or fried potatoes. See, the guy is managing, and that's how people manage, and that's why quite often it's a secret that they can't read, and people don't find. But so that's what I would do if I was a billionaire. I would put some money into efforts to improve literacy. Well, first of all, in my country. I mean, other countries, the same problem exists in other countries.
And do you like physical books or ebooks?
I prefer physical books. I do read ebooks sometimes, if when it's convenient. But yes, I prefer the physical book. Most people prefer the physical book. Some people, some people like ebooks. A lot of people like audiobooks now because they can listen while they're driving. A lot of people, have to drive for an hour to get to work, uh, or they're driving all over the place for their work. Salesmen drive a lot. And you can listen to the instead of reading the book, you can listen to it. And the people who read the books aloud on the tape or on the disc, they're usually actors and they read it very well. And they add to the book by giving characters different accents, different ways of speaking. And it's really listening to books is really a very popular thing now.
You've long been a very pro-Europe voice. So during the Brexit period, I think you and three fellow authors, Lee Child, Jojo Moyes, and Kate Moss, started a friendship tour that had stops in Milan and other major European cities. So I'm thinking the economic fallout of Brexit is quite known. What do you think about the cultural and social impact that has had on Europe and its impact on the European unity project?
Well, I think it's been very bad for my country. There are always people who say our country is the best, we don't want foreigners, but they're wrong. And a great deal of culture comes from the mixing of culture, the mixing of people. You know, we have rock and roll. Why do we have rock and roll? Because Africans went to America and they heard European hymn tunes. And rock and roll is a mixture of European hymn tunes with the African rhythms. And so we got rock and roll, which is loved all over the world. And that's there are many, many examples where a country's culture has been enriched by uh, by drawing on other cultures and to present to the world a hostile face. That's what we do now in Britain. We we present to the world a hostile face. People don't want to come here because they think they won't be welcome. And that's very, very bad. It makes us insular. It makes us narrow-minded. And it's a very bad thing, and it'll take us a long time to get over it.
You mentioned rock and roll. What kind of music do you listen to?
I listen to most kinds of music. I like rock and roll, and I like classical music. I'm very fond of Mozart. Uh, don't like jazz very much, and I don't much like 20th century classical music.